Hello and welcome to This Week in Property. I'm your host, Richard Swan, and in today's show, if you're fascinated with the subjects of HMO or co-living developments, those kind of buzzwords, labels, whatever you want to call them, then I have got the man for you. That very handsome, recently manicured man. We're just having a wee joke about hairstyles there. I can not talk to that at all these days. That gentleman is none other than Matt Baker. Now, Matt, he's the co-founder of Scott Baker Properties, also the HMO platform. So if you're watching this back, you can see his lovely sign at the back there. He's also an author of that book you can see there as well, Next Level Landlord. Now, I've not had the privilege of reading that yet, and I'm waiting on Amazon, who've promised that they're going to be delivering it tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to getting jumped into that. That is the Next Level Landlord, very important thing. And he's got an amazing experience and background in this whole thing. So much so, if I give you a wee quick tag, Matt has managed to build a £5 million plus portfolio in 4 years using investor finance. And that's a guy you can learn from. But for your time today, for being so gracious, Matt, thank you very much and welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard, and thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, really looking forward to this. It's going to be great teasing out your opinions and your experiences, the ups and downs of the property roller coaster that we know and love.
I didn't realise we had that long today. So
yeah, I would just be a quick summary. Now, talking of summaries, here's the thing, because we're going to jump into everything that you're doing now. You know, how you're helping people, the books and so on, and services and everything you've got going, and projects and your experiences and your opinions, as I said. But what's the deal before that? You know, how did you get into this mad, crazy world? Have you always been there, or did you go through a different career path before now?
Yeah, I'm actually in a previous life, I'm a musician, a freelance musician. So
no way.
Yeah, so
Right.
I'm a piano player.
Oh, fantastic.
And so all through my 20s, I was playing in bands, doing gigs. I studied up in Edinburgh, so I was doing loads of stuff around Edinburgh and the kind of Edinburgh jazz scene as a pianist there.
Wow.
Went travelling for a bit, came back, then moved to London, did loads of work there, and working with different bands. I was trying to make it in the music industry. Never really kind of as a front person, more as the kind of part of the band, the keyboard player, and I'd help to kind of write music and perform it and play, and that's what I really love doing.
Brilliant.
But as anyone in the creative arts will know, the income goes like this. It's up and down. Yeah. It's a bit choppy, bit of a roller coaster. You can be going on tour for a week and have all expenses paid, and you come away with a big healthy bank balance, and you have nothing for weeks on end or months on end, and you end up doing functions, weddings, parties, and becomes a little bit grating over time. It's great fun to start with, and then when you start having to do it for money, something which you absolutely love and have grown up doing through from a child into studying music and then going into my 20s, and it became very grating and kind of came away from why I was wanting to be a musician. So it all became about the money. So because it came about the money, I was like, well, I don't want to put my creative juices into something which I'm not enjoying. So I'm going to do something for money, which ended up, I was doing teaching. So I was still in music. So I taught piano, and I got really successful at that, became oversubscribed. So there's a massive waiting list of people wanting to work with me. And it was great. And so I set up a music school, and then that was my first business. So starting to get more of a resilient income, which is something I've always wanted, is to have resilient recurring revenue. And that's where, and then the music school was the first kind of way of doing that. But then I came across property, and as a lot of us do these days, I stumbled across a course, and I actually went to an event to learn how to grow my music school business, and ended up signing up to a 3-day on how to do property investing, a 3-day on how to do forex trading, and a 4-day on public speaking. Right. So I was like, okay, my credit card completely rinsed, and it became a bit of a course junkie for a couple of years. This was back in 2014, 2015. And kind of was soaking up knowledge, but also implementing it. So bought our first investment property in 2015, and that's pretty much into the property industry there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You know, it's amazing how you started that whole story, because I now know that you and I could have a completely separate podcast together, because everything you're saying, you're preaching to the converted guitarist, played in bands, know everything you're talking about. In fact, while you were talking, two things popped into my head. Being on stage, playing guitar in one of the bands at the Birmingham NEC, thousands of, I think it was from the Harley Davidson Motor Club, thousands of people there, loads of money in the bank. This is awesome. What happened in 2 weeks' time? Playing in a band at a bowling club. That shows you the income roller coaster when it comes to music. But we love it, of course. You know, it feeds our soul. But everything you're saying, I'm like, yep, that's right. And then the same thing happened for me as well. It's like, what's this property thing? You know, reading books and courses and so on. So it's fascinating how you're saying that. And did you find with the journey and, you know, putting your kind of toes in the water with the property stuff, did you go on a certain path? Did you kind of do some flips for a certain time? Did you start buy-to-lets? Because you're well known for HMOs, for this big, you know, co-living developments and so on. Was it right into that world from the first go? How did you find your way through the market?
So when I was taught property, I was taught, well, you need to, you know, do something simple first and build your way up. So that's what I thought, I'm going to do that. But because I'm a naturally impatient person, I want everything to happen yesterday. Much to the, you know, my wife hates it, my team hates it, and just like, yeah, so what's going on with this? She's like, you only asked me to do it 5 minutes ago. It's like, really? Yeah. I feel like that conversation was years ago. But it's, yes, so I was like, okay, I'm going to go do a buy-to-let. But I knew that HMOs is where I wanted to go, because you know, it is the thing that everyone knows. If you're going to do property, residential property, it's where you can get cash. You can get cash flow from it, and it can be. Actually, we'll come on to the types of HMOs a bit later, but you started off in a buy-to-let and an HMO, got an offer agreed on both of them on the same day. So I pretty much was an HMO landlord from day dot.
Wow.
But the way that it happened was that they were supposed to all complete at the same time. This was back in so we bought the first one 2015, December the 18th. It was a little bungalow, bought with my mum. We went in over the Christmas holidays and ripped it all apart, and you know, thought, oh yeah, we're property developers now. And then we had a bit of a help from a handyman who turned out to be less than handy, and you know, he spent quite a lot of money on it and did quite a lot of work on it, and learned a lot in the process, which was great. And then but the HMO one just ticking along, hadn't really completed, and we'd already got the bungalow bought, refurbed and tenanted by the time it actually completed on the HMO, or the property that was to become an HMO. The only reason we got it done is because it was coming up to the 31st of March 2016, and if anyone's in property back then will know that on the 1st of April 2016 was when the extra 3% stamp duty came in.
Yes.
So I'm like pushing forward and saying, come on, this deal has to complete, this property has to complete. And the solicitor said, I was speaking to my solicitor the first time we'd used them in these two purchases. I said, what's the problem? And I said, well, I'm asking the owner of the property questions about the landlord, because it was a leasehold house in the northwest, because they could get quite a lot of that. It was, so they couldn't answer any of the questions about the freeholder. And the solicitors kept asking the same question over and over again. And they're not coming back with the answer. It's like, so what's the other solution? She said, oh, we can get an insurance policy. So how much is that going to be? 30 quid. It's like, let's just do that and complete on this tomorrow. You know, so we could have completed on this like 2 months ago. Like, seriously. Anyway, don't get me started on solicitors. So anyway, those were my first two purchases: a bungalow and this HMO, which was a 5-bed HMO. We turned it an upside down house. The upstairs was actually bigger than the downstairs. Three beds. So we did 2 beds on the ground floor. So 3 beds on the ground floor, 2 on the first floor, and we put the communal kitchen on the first floor. So it's an upside down house.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. God, right for the word go. That's an incredible story. And again, you've got me here like a nodding dog. You know, the trades, the handymen that aren't very handy. You know, the solicitor that's as slow as treacle and can't see the most obvious, you know, option to pick and just go on with it. Everything you're talking about, law changes that we all have to dance around, and we've got our eyes on calendars and stuff. It's amazing the game that we're in, if you can call it that. It's quite fascinating. And you're right. You mentioned a couple of things where about HMOs. There's different different types of HMOs. We'll get into that kind of stuff and how to analyse them and what have you. But two things that kind of threads I want to pull on there. You mentioned the word cash flow. I think that's the thing that kind of surprises people the most once they've got inside the property world. Maybe they've got it's a first buy to let, or maybe they've got the first 2 or 3 buy to lets, and it's a single tenant. So they see this building, this shell, and maybe it's a big house, maybe it's 4 bed, 5 bed, whatever, and it's one tenant with one rent coming in. And all of a sudden, they might meet someone like yourself or read your book or just chat to you. And all of a sudden, that exact same building, that same asset, just done differently, changed into an HMO with more than one, tenant living in there. All of a sudden, the cash flow, it's just a massive difference, isn't it?
Yeah, it's dramatic. And it's, I think HMOs are not necessarily for the faint-hearted.
Yes.
That there's there's a greater reward, but there's greater risk and greater hassle that goes with it. And I think it's not completely hands off, it's not completely passive like our buy-to-lets are great, money just comes in, but I need 1,000 of them to actually get anywhere.
Yeah. Actually, the kind of numbers game when it comes to it all. I'm going to pull in another wee thread there, how you were talking about the lovely solicitors. I'm thinking of how many fellow investors I talk to, and what I've noticed a pattern that if I mention the phrase HMO, there's a kind of resistance, there's a fear, and a lot of the time it's just because they're not in that market as yet. And it's because of what they perceive as the legals, the completely different structure. Wait a minute, I know, Richard, you're explaining this fabulous reward. There's this buy-to-let cash flow there. There's this HMO. Suddenly the cash flow is completely different. I get that. That's great. That's the plus. But all the negatives that I'm fearful of, Richard, of stepping in is I'm hearing about licenses and special regulations. And now all of a sudden the corridors have to be a certain size and fire doors. Oh, my goodness, I can't be bothered. Do you find that pattern as well? Is it a misconceived one if it is there? And how do you talk to people about that if they've got it?
So I think the first thing is that if people are scared of it and it's scaring a lot of people away from the marketplace, that's probably a good thing. Right. So you're actually only getting the people that are going to do it and do it right.
Yeah.
So if you think about how HMOs have evolved over time, the old school landlords have got these properties that are probably not NAP compliant. As mandatory licensing laws changed in 2018, a lot of people exited the market and meant that there were all these properties that were, there's an opportunity to upgrade them to make them really good, but they couldn't be bothered. So the people that are coming into the market now are the ones that you have to go in with your eyes wide open, which is why you read the book. But then you do it right. You do it to a good standard. Yeah. And then what it does is it sorts cuts the wheat from the chaff. But there's a huge opportunity because there's a huge demand for rental property, number one. But there's a huge demand for HMOs. And I hear a lot of people say that, HMO market is saturated, or there's all of this kind of stuff. Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. There's plenty of opportunity out there to create HMOs and create that cash flow. And everybody's circumstances will be different. Everybody's strategies will be slightly different within the HMO market. So it is a bit of a niche that we're I suppose owning here, in the fact that this is what we want people to do, because we need more landlords to do good quality HMOs, or next level HMOs as we call them.
Yes, and there's a difference. That's a phrase I wanted to touch on. What in your mind makes that next level landlord?
So if you think about the HMO market, I'm just going to come back to the HMO as a product or service. So if we take a trip back in time to the era before 1998, and I want to do an analogy with computers. And before 1998, you've got computers like or manufacturers like Packard, Compaq, Dell. They're making what I call a beige box. So every computer is exactly the same. They're identical as everyone else. They're quite clunky. You have to code, you have MS-DOS, all of that to get it to work. I'm sure a lot of your listeners won't be old enough to remember that. The discs were floppy.
That's right. Oh my goodness, yes. Oh wow.
So, but the thing is that all these computers made by these different manufacturers were identical. The only point of difference was the price. So that's a highly commoditized marketplace. And then in 1998, out comes Steve Jobs with something completely different, something a bit sexier. And that was the Imac G3. Now, what he's done is he's created something which is completely out of the marketplace. It's the same thing. It looks different. It turns on, it just works. It's more user-friendly. It's designed with the customer in mind. And because of that, the profit margins on the iMacs shot up to well over 20%. And the profit margins on the beige boxes, there's only one way to go. If the only way to compete is on price, it's only going to ever go down. But the interesting thing is that iMac is no longer called a computer. They've created their own marketplace.
Gotcha.
And this is what the next level HMO is. So a next level landlord is someone who does next level HMOs essentially.
Gotcha.
And the next level HMO is it's in the top 5% of our marketplace, which is where we want to be. It's where the best customers, the best people that are going to live in these properties, that are going to, they're going to pay a premium for it. They're going to be able to afford it. They're going to enjoy, they're going to love where they live. And therefore they're going to stay and they're going to pay. And they will pay for quality space, quality design, and quality service. And that's that kind of 3-point definition of what I call the next level HMO: quality space, quality design, and quality service. But we need to be in the top 5% of each of these. So where I think a lot of people fall down is they say, right, all I need to do is create a really sexy looking HMO, a really nice property, and then I've solved all my problems. But no, the secret here is in how they're managed. So that third one of quality service is what actually keeps money coming into your pocket. So you can create a really good looking property, but if it's badly managed, people are still going to be moving in and out all the time. So that's essentially in a nutshell what I mean by next level HMOs.
Fantastic. So that's you are the Steve Jobs of the HMO world. Is that what we're saying here?
That's some big shoes there.
That's a big statement there. I'm going to set the bar up at that level. I think you should. I think you definitely should. And the book itself, I mean, give me some teasers and stuff, because I can't wait to receive it tomorrow morning if Amazon does their job properly. Do you teach that process? Do you teach that kind of mindset around being that kind of landlord and creating those kind of spaces and services and so on?
Yes, definitely. So the book itself is kind of amalgamation of all of our experiences, all of our learnings. And it's, when I say our, as myself and my business partner, Niall Scott from Scott Baker Properties. So kind of what we've learned over the last 5 years, and I've kind of condensed it down into a bit of a methodology, which we call our tenant first method. So when I started getting the ideas for the book together, I always knew that I wanted to have this idea of a customer first approach, the same way as Steve Jobs does in the way of creating this device, which is no longer just a computer. It's creating this HMO, which is no longer just an HMO. It's now a house. It's a home. And that's essentially what we're looking to achieve. And that tenant first methodology was I basically took the word first, and we have five principles that next level landlords know. So they know how to have a focus on their business. They have business plans. They have strategies. They have business blueprints and all of this stuff, which you do before you start going out there looking for properties. You don't just go out to an auction and go, that looks like a good deal, I'm just going to take it. No, you strategize first. They have focus. They also have insight into their customer, the people they're looking to let to, the planning rules they need to get in place, the properties themselves, and the place they're going to be investing in. So they can basically be the master of their area. They'll also be able to review and deliver projects. So that's a bit of an art form. So they can analyze deals, raise funding, have teams in place that deliver these projects. Then they'll have a service-led approach to letting, like all the co-living approach. And so we'll come on to co-living in a moment. And then they have a business that can thrive. There's within the book, I go through that tenant first methodology: focus, insight, R&D, service, and thrive. And kind of really break it down into all the bits that we need to know. And I go into quite a lot of detail. There are some books out there which just tell stories, and you kind of learn vicariously through stories. I've got the stories in there and those case studies, but actually it is it is a bit of a reference guide as well. So yeah.
Oh,
but the other thing which the other thing I can announce today is that we did, with our revised edition, hit the #1 bestseller again.
Hey, fantastic. There you go.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. Right? See, yeah, Steve Jobs. See, I put that bar up there, and then all of a sudden we get that announcement. That's sensational. Well done, Matt. We'll be very pleased with that. Brilliant stuff. Now, you mentioned one of the key words there, Matt, the tenant, the person who's actually in there. You've provided the shelter for, the home for. They're actually providing you with the income that's coming through, etc. An all important part of that puzzle. What's your thoughts and opinions on how to find the right tenant, to attract the right tenant? Because you were mentioning quite a few things there about a beautiful environment and the right services. Is there key elements that you always think of when you say that phrase, tenant first?
Yes. So my first thought there is actually, I don't like the word tenant, even though I've put it in the methodology. It's tenant first, because generally most people out there think about the tenant, the landlord, the tenant. And I think that landlord-tenant relationship, which is an historic relationship from historic landowners. You have the landowner, then you have it's literally a feudal system. We're talking hundreds of years old, thousands of years old. And that is outdated kind of view of the land overlord, the landlord up here, and the tenant down here.
Gotcha.
Whereas I think the modern day way of thinking of rental properties is that it is a service. You are, as a landlord, are providing a service to a customer, and the tenant is the customer. Gotcha. And if you don't provide a good service, then your tenant can leave and go somewhere else. Yeah. I think at the moment it's harder for tenants to do that, because there's a huge lack of supply of rental properties. This is why we need more landlords, more people to actually go and create good quality properties. This is where we call them housemates. We don't call them tenants. When people move in, they're housemates, because it then comes to that whole idea of co-living and people liking the people that they live with and forming meaningful relationships within properties or within shared houses. But the tenant first, if you get the product right, if you get that house looking really great, so a design-led property, which has got a decent space with all the things that your tenants need, like their own washing facilities. Most of our stuff is en suite. Maybe you might have one bathroom for 2 people sharing, but they've got washing facilities. That's a big thing these days, and lots of storage. As pretty much as long as they can have a shower in a clean environment, which they can control, and they've got storage, and then they're pretty happy. So that's what we mean by that. And attracting really good tenants is about just showcasing what it is you've got. So having amazing photography, amazing videography, 360-degree tours, and we let all of our property off virtual viewings essentially these days. Really? So, yeah.
And you found that carried on right beyond COVID. It's just a thing that you do now, is it?
Well, we didn't start letting until after COVID, so we did this after COVID.
Brilliant.
So it was kind of as COVID was dying down, we started actually our own management agency, and we were looking, because we were really frustrated with the differing levels of service across the country, because we got properties from Portsmouth all the way up to Edinburgh and places in between. It was like, well, a property that we've got in Newcastle is getting a completely different service to property we've got in Manchester, which has got a very different service from the property that we've got in Coventry. So we were like, okay, how can we improve the level of service to make sure that each of these housemates gets the same experience? So we took back some of the properties in-house, and then we set up our own managing agency called Co-Home, which is designed to be a co-living specialist operator.
Fantastic. And is that a service not only that you're using it to benefit yourself, controlling your own properties and stuff, but you actually do it for other landlords as well? Is that what you've managed to do there?
Yeah, so we're starting to manage for others as well. So because this is quite a bit of a new thing, it is, I suppose, we can manage anywhere in the country, because we've mastered the virtual viewing and how we can get people to be shown the property in a good way. So we've mastered that, but we tried a lot of trial and error on our own stuff. So we've started taking on properties in and around the kind of the south coast, with Portsmouth as the hub, and then we've got Birmingham as another hub. So those are the areas that we're focusing on right now. because you can't go everywhere. So we just can say, well, Midlands and South Coast is what we're doing.
Right, fantastic. Right, so listeners, viewers, you heard that. So number one, make sure that you're setting things up for housemates, not tenants. Remember that buzzword. Number two, if you are in those areas, you're looking for that. You're trying to alleviate some of your headaches, maybe looking for someone with that quality premium level of service, then, who can go into the show notes pages, use all the links, and you can see what Matt's team are doing, and they can maybe help you. Fantastic. So HMOs, types of HMOs, we mentioned it a bit earlier. I'm conscious of the fact that everyone listening, watching, they're all at different levels. Some are just thinking about getting into property. Some of them might be very, very seasoned professionals and they've started in HMOs. And they've maybe heard some of the terms, HMO, mini HMO, large HMO, etc. How would you explain the different types that are available?
So I suppose when you say like mini-mos, they're all terms that have been kind of banded around by different professionals, different trainers and mentors out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So there are some professionals which say, these kind of coaches that say, well, a mini-mos is the way forward, because you pretty much do it anywhere. It's really easy, very little work involved. I'm not a huge fan of mini-mos because your cash flow is in one tenant. So if one tenant moves out, you're pretty much breaking even or making a loss. So in terms of resilience, it's not my favorite thing. We have done 4 beds in the past, but we actually turned it back into a family home. We were better off making it as a family home, because demand for family homes is really high, so rents are decent. So we actually made more money doing that, and less. Well, we already converted it, so we'd already done those work, but that was fine. We got a loan from the council at 0% interest rate for 10 years for that one, so that was taken care of. But then with the larger ones, I think there's when you get to the, people call them mega mos, and then you could start thinking, well, what is a mega mo? Is it 6 people? Is it 7 people? Is it 10 people? Is it 50 people? Is it 500 people? I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that a mega mo is the answer, like one massive HMO. The largest one we've done to date is 21 bedrooms.
Is it?
But that's divided into clusters. So they are, well, the smallest one is a studio, largest one is a 5-bed, and it is a cluster of 1, 2, 3s, 4s, and 5 beds, all in one block. So I suppose we've got a series of mini modes there, but it's all under one umbrella. We can provide a service to that block. So they're not just part of one flat or one house, they're actually a part of an entire community of 21 people there, but without feeling like they're living with 20 other people. So that's the largest one we've done. But we do look to some of the bigger operators out there, like the Collective in London, before everything kind of changed for them. Looking at what they were doing, kind of taking lessons. And actually I did interview them for the book to get a sense of how they had approached co-living as a sector. But I think for us, to summarize where I like to be, I like to develop properties which are probably between 6 and kind of 20 bedrooms. Those are the types of properties. And I probably would go up to probably about 30 or 40. We were looking at some schemes around the 30 bedroom mark, again, divided into clusters in a building, but whereby you say, well, one building, maximize it, and but you're looking at a big PR job with councils to get planning and all of this.
Of course, it's a kind of bigger challenge for you. But you found your sweet spot, if you like. That's fantastic, brilliant stuff. You mentioned the word development. Obviously, one of the kind of big things that's crept into the market over recent times has been permitted development. Those relaxation changes, class of use, etc. What's your kind of thoughts on all of that?
I think it's a good thing. I think the government have actually that they've made it clear. They clarified what they actually want. They've learned a lot of lessons from the old Class O and other Class M, the old PD rights, where there were quite a few loopholes to make really small flats, micro flats. and they've got rid of those now. So we have to create flats which are national minimum standards, which I think is the right thing to do. You have to have natural light in there. I think that's the right thing to do. I think they put in some good caveats for permitted development, but within the introduction of the Class E, kind of general business use class, and the permitted development rights that now apply to every single Class E dwelling, that means that it's opened up a whole host of other buildings which may have been sitting empty, underutilized, are non-profitable, with these businesses that the councils may have resisted changes of use, or made it hard to change the use. The permitted development right has then made the government's come in at the kind of helicopter level and said to the councils, no, we want these to be developed. This is a really nice and easy way to get new homes. And because we've put in all these extra caveats about minimum space standards, in fact, you've got to have natural light, and think about these other things for the amenity of the people that are going to live there. The councils, they don't like permitted development anyway, because it takes away their control, but that it just means that we've got more opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the end of it all, we're actually providing the service as well. Because you touched on it, when you're saying those phrases again, it's real life cases that are popping into my head. And at the moment, there's myself, two of my business partners. I've got a particular project in Sheffield, and it's a big old abandoned cinema building, and it's just been there for years. It's not helped or served anyone. And by doing this project, we're going to be able to turn that around. It's going to be split into 5 different blocks, and I think at the end of it, it's 25 rooms we're able to provide. And I mean the word provide. We're actually providing something to the community, providing something to the people, the housemates, let's call them that, your phrase, that are going to move in there. And the place, the neighbourhood, everything about it is going to be transformed. So I'm totally on board with you. I can see all of the pluses. And I think you're right. It's important not just to say, oh, it's the Wild West now, right? Anybody can do anything. No, you're right. They've put these caveats in about the lighting and so on, so that we don't veer the other way and become, the tabloid slum landlord that they love to try and, target us with. So yeah, totally on board with you. What about the other parts of the puzzles? Things like wait a minute, I'm not getting HMOs because I'll need to get licensed, and then the property needs to get licensed. And I think in my town, there's these Article 4 areas. That's a mysterious term. And again, I'm conscious of the people listening in and watching. And when you look at that, see all of that, is it good? Is it bad? The wheat from the chaff that you mentioned earlier, is it that case?
I think so. And licensing is nothing to be afraid of, first and foremost, because if you're doing what you're supposed to in creating a safe place to live, then you'll get the license. Yes, there's a fee attached to it, but let's say it's £1,000 for your license for 5 years, and you've got 6 or 7 tenants in there. It's like a £8 or £9 or £10 per tenant per month. It's not very much in the grand scheme of things. So you have to put these things into perspective. So licensing, I don't, even when I'm working with clients, we don't focus that much on licensing, because we focus on doing a really good job, and then the license is just something that we engage with the licensing officers and HMO officers and all of that. But in reality, unless you've got an absolute stickler for detail as an HMO officer, they just wave everything through and go, yeah, absolutely fine, because they're so busy focusing on the what's the really bad stuff in the marketplace. I was trying to think of a word without swearing. I'm not sure what the etiquette is on this podcast, but they're so busy focused on that waving the good stuff through is actually a breeze for them. Gotcha. So obviously they're going to do their due diligence, but when you get to know them as a developer, they literally, I've had licenses signed off, without a final inspection. Because they just know that what we do, what the contractor does, is good. So licensing is not a real issue. And if you're worried about licensing, then you're probably trying to play on the line. So you go, well, is my room 6.51 or 6.55 square meters? It's like, okay, it's not a next level HMO. That's not a bedroom in our books. And it's not future proof, because you know what? The government can change those standards. They've done it before. They can change them again. So 8 square meters, a lot of councils have gone to 8 as a minimum anyway, for single occupancy. A 6.51 square meter room is not very big. So licensing, not a problem. Article 4 now. I love
let's describe that for folks listening and might not be familiar with these terms we're throwing around. Can you explain it to them, but then also add on your own experience and opinions of it as well?
Yes, of course. So Article 4 is a way of a local authority or local council stopping a permitted development right that the government have brought in. So we mentioned permitted development rights, which is a way of the government trying to encourage more development of housing, or to help you put up a satellite dish without having to go through planning permission. So that's what permitted development does. An Article 4 directive stops that from just happening without you going and asking for permission again. So, for example, a conservation area is a type of Article 4 directive, because they say, well, we like the look of this part of the town, so we don't want anything to happen to it without our say-so. So that's the council has control over a conservation area. Now, in the case of HMOs, the change of use from a house to an HMO, because the house is a C3 dwelling and an HMO is a C4 dwelling, which basically means up to between 3 and 6 unrelated people can live in that property. So that change of use from C3 to C4 is permitted development. So you can go back and forth as much as you like without asking anyone's permission, unless your local authority has brought in an Article 4 directive to stop it. And historically, those have been the big student towns that brought it in, because in the 80s and the 90s, landlords were just going in and buying up whole streets of properties back then when it was really, really cheap. Well, our perception of cheap, and then just turning them into student houses. And they were just changing the face of neighborhoods. Entire neighborhoods were becoming student villages, and there was no control over it. There was no HMO use class back then either. So what happened was the government then introduced the C4 use class in 2008, and then the ability to check, and they also brought in the permitted development right at the same time. And then they brought in, the councils then brought in the Article 4 directives to stop it, so they can control where HMOs go. Now, it doesn't stop them from happening. It just means you've got to ask permission. Now, in order to know how to get planning permission on anything, you need to understand what planning is. And planning is basically a set of tests you've got to pass. And those tests are set by the local planning policy. And you generally find those in the local plan or supplementary planning documents, and you can go and have a look at what is the policy for getting an HMO in an Article 4 area. So you look at the policy and go, right, well, if I can tick all of these 6 or 7 boxes, then the council have got no reason to refuse me, regardless of what all the other neighbours around the property say. If there's any hint of something where you're not quite complying with policy, then it becomes difficult. Doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to get it, but there's a whole backlash against HMOs in certain areas of the country. And that's because there's a lot of rubbish out there. But we like working in Article 4 areas where the policy is really clear. We avoid it where the policy is not clear. So, for example, in Portsmouth, we will buy properties without planning, knowing that we can get planning because the policy is very clear. Whereas somewhere like Manchester, I probably wouldn't want to buy a property unless I got planning first, because it's more of a risk, because there is not a clear policy. It's a bit more subjective. So I think people avoid Article 4, but when you can know how to use an Article 4 directive, there's a massive planning gain. So, for example, take Portsmouth, for example, we were able to buy a property for 250, and it's worth about 600 when it's finished.
Brilliant.
So that's what Article 4 can give you. And in fact, that's what planning permission gives you, which is why we like 7 to 10 bed properties the most, because we can take them from the house, maybe take them through a C4 use, and then take them up to a sui generis, which is the large HMO. Well, sui generis means in a class of its own, and large HMOs fall into that use class.
Brilliant stuff. Well explained, sir. That's a subject you've danced around before, you can tell. Fantastic. Now, I could keep talking for another 4 or 5 hours. It's brilliant, but I want to be very respectful of your time. You've been great for us so far. And of course, folks, they can jump into links and get his book and everything else. You mentioned some of the numbers there, some of the funding, some of the prices, etc. And one of the great successes you've had is, using investment funding to build up a lot of these assets. What's your thoughts in that area? How should people think about that? Any kind of top tips and tricks that you've learned along the way?
Okay, so when someone says, when I have a conversation about money with people,
Yeah.
I say, do you have an unlimited amount of money? Everyone initially says no. And the answer is, and I'll just tell them, you're wrong. Of course, you have an unlimited amount of money. You just don't have it right now.
Yeah.
So everyone has access to all the money in the world. You just got to find a way of getting it to me. Whenever I'm thinking, I can't find any money, it's just like, hey, how do I just get that money to come to me? I go like this. It's a bit weird. Let's say, so what activity haven't I done to get money to come to me? What opportunities haven't I seized in order to find that? What could I go and do which is going to help me to find people who've got money? Raising money is not the reason not to do property, if I've said that correctly. The thing about property is that it's harder to find good projects than it is to find money, because there's an abundance of money, but there isn't an abundance of properties.
Yes.
Even though I would say there is an abundance of properties, like from a mindset perspective, like there's plenty of opportunity out there. In relative terms, there's all the money in the world. Literally, there are people sitting on millions of pounds in bank accounts. With inflation at 9% we're at the moment, they're sweating. They really are. I speak to investors, I speak to clients of ours, people, I'm saying, I've got money I'm in cash. They're literally stressing about the fact that they can't, they need to get out of cash and they don't know where to put their money.
Yeah.
So my view was always, okay, I need to get good at finding projects that work, and then the money will come to me. And it always has. Even if it's the night before I need the money, we've always found the money. Yeah. So to give you an example, recently, we were refinancing a project. It's a long story, but we were in planning for a long time, a lot longer than we thought we were going to be. So we had to get off one bridge because that bank weren't happy for us being on that bridge, and we had to go onto another bridge whilst we're refinancing onto a mortgage. Right. So and the bank A wasn't happy to extend for us to get onto the mortgage, even though our initial plan was to go with that same bank for the mortgage, but not anymore. Right. So it's the refinance from one bridge to another, and the valuer got involved, and there's this whole conversation between us, the lender, and the valuer about what the value of this property was. Was it an HMO? Was it a house, etc.? And we were saying it's worth this. The valuer was saying it's worth that, and you need your license in place before you can complete on it. And we're just like, well, we're coming to the end of our bridge. We need to get this in place. So we actually, with this new bridging company, agreed some kind of hybrid valuation somewhere between what the valuer thought and what we thought, which was a great conversation to have. But it meant that we had to find 25 grand overnight. Actually, we had the weekend.
Wow.
So I sent a message to a couple of our friends and people we've worked with in the past, and the money was in my bank about a half an hour later.
Brilliant.
So, but that comes from lots of activity over probably about 6 or 7 year period.
Yes.
Of being active, showing people what you're doing, telling people what you're doing. That's the most important thing, is telling people what you're doing. Yeah. Most people know property or are interested in property. And so when you say to someone, oh, I'm doing some property investing, most people ears prick up and go, oh, how do you do that? Yeah. So they'll either go, how do you do that? Or they'll go, property investing's bad.
It's black and white. It's so true. Oh my, you got me like an old dog again. I'm telling you, they're just preaching to the converted again. Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you, I've enjoyed this so much. This is sense. We'll need to have you on another time as well, because honestly, we could chat for hours and hours and hours. Absolutely brilliant. So, folks, whenever it's safe to do so, go into the show notes page, get all the links, get the book, like my good self, get Amazon to deliver that to you. It's also in Kindle and audiobook and everything else as well. Yeah. Hook in with this man, follow him, follow his journey. Maybe you're in one of those areas, you can use these services on the management perspective, who knows? But let's make sure you follow him, because he is the piano player. He is the Steve Jobs of the HMO world, but we know and love him as Matt Baker. Matt, for your time today, thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. Remember, with the guests that you just saw, go into the show notes for the page, because all of their links are there so that you can get in touch and to get more information. And talking about getting more information, more guests, more insights, more knowledge, etc., make sure you're subscribed. get the subscription done, get the notifications on, and then we'll always keep in touch with you every single time a brand new show is going to come out. So thanks for tuning to This Week in Property.